Terence Crawford says Keith Thurman is clout chasing. Can't beat him or Errol Spence. We don't believe you. What's good, everybody? It's your boy Cardinal Red Sports. Let's talk about it. All right, y'all. So, in a recent interview with Brian Custer, Terence Crawford, Bud Crawford, who is fighting David Avanesyan this weekend, tomorrow to be exact, for the WBO welterweight championship, had some pretty choice words for former WBA super titleist Keith one-time Thurman regarding his wishes to fight Crawford and his intentions on fighting Errol Spence Jr. and why that hasn't happened up until this point. You know, it's funny that Terence Crawford would use the word clout chasing or the words clout chasing and someone else's name in the same sentence, the way he's been telling, riding Errol Spence's tail for the past year. It's crazy that he would call someone else a clout chaser, because at this point, Terence Crawford is kind of the definition of clout chaser. He and Keith Thurman, I would say they're kind of on a similar plateau. I think Keith Thurman, his mission when he became champion was to remain a champion, like everybody's mission, and definitely sideline the toughest competition. Because even though him and Errol Spence have been on the same promotional company pretty much the whole time that he was a champion, and still up until this date, we haven't seen those two guys get it on, and you have to wonder why that is. It definitely isn't because of Errol Spence not wanting to fight Keith Thurman. It's more that I think Keith Thurman doubted his skill sets versus a fighter of the caliber of Errol Spence Jr. And to hold on to a strap, sometimes you got to do certain things. Now, Keith Thurman, I definitely don't think is as much of a clout chaser as Terence Crawford is, for the simple fact he did take the risk versus Manny Pacquiao. That's a fight he didn't have to take, but I think that the money was too good and the exposure was too good, and Keith Thurman couldn't pass up on the chance to become one of the biggest names in the sport. So I have to give him a lot more credit than I do Terence Crawford, because both of those guys, Crawford and Pacquiao, were on Top Rank at the same time. And just like today, Terence Crawford used Manny Pacquiao's name to try to make himself more relevant. You know, mentioning the fact that he could fight Pacquiao, being offered that fight several times and never signing the contract, similar to the same thing he's doing to Errol Spence Jr., and that fight ultimately never coming to fruition. So, you know, I can't say that Terence Crawford is any more or any less of a clout chaser than Keith Thurman is, but I definitely would say that Keith Thurman is more willing to challenge himself than Bud, because at least Thurman was willing to get into the ring with Manny Pacquiao. Obviously, a stiff competition for Thurman because he was able to knock Thurman off. And Terence Crawford, more or less, will use your name for publicity, for free publicity. He'll talk about fighting you. He'll talk about fighting tough fights. But at the end of the day, when those contracts actually get sent out, when names call him back out, the similar thing that he's doing to Errol Spence Jr., he was all too willing to call Errol Spence Jr. out when he knew the fight couldn't be made. But as soon as the fight could be made, all that calling out stopped, and it was more that you guys are trying to screw me. You know, it's crazy because, once again, this is the same thing that Terence Crawford did to Manny Pacquiao and never fought him, but definitely was willing to use Pacquiao's name to try to build his name up that much more. And as far as Keith Thurman and Errol Spence go, you know, I don't think Keith Thurman ever had intentions on fighting Errol Spence Jr. or taking the risk that came along with Errol Spence Jr. because the thing about it is, if he would have fought Spence and lost, then he definitely would have had to run that fight back, and he could possibly have 2 losses on his record now instead of just 1. So perhaps taking on Manny Pacquiao was the right call for Thurman, even though it ended in a loss. It's only 1 loss, and even though he had to take 3, 4, 5 years out of the sport, he's able to step right back into another championship fight. All he had to do was go through Mario Barrios. And to be honest with you, I don't think the Barrios fight should have called for Thurman to be elevated to a mandatory, because it started a whole new mess. And Errol Spence Jr. is kind of caught up in the middle of it. I think it's kind of awkward that they haven't announced this fight yet. Perhaps they're going to wait till, next year to January, because they don't want to waste advertising dollars on something that's not supposed to happen till February or March. I do find it a little ironic that there was so much talk about that fight, Thurman versus Spence 2 or 3 weeks ago, and now nobody's really saying anything about it, and they haven't even mentioned signing a contract yet. So, I'm eager to see where Spence is going to go with all this. I know he's waiting on Stanionis and Virgil Ortiz to make their decisions on whether they're going to fight. And I'm guessing that's going to be the determining factor in whether he actually fights Keith Thurman or not. But it does leave you wondering what's actually going on in the background. Could there be something else keeping that fight from being announced? And as far as Keith Thurman and Bud Crawford go, once Bud does beat David Avanesyan and moves on to his next fight, I don't see Terence Crawford fighting Keith Thurman anytime soon. I don't see Thurman being an opponent of Crawford anytime soon. I don't think Thurman wants any smoke with Terence Crawford, and I don't think Terence Crawford wants any smoke with Keith Thurman as well. I think both of those guys have got a mutual agreement to stay away from one another just to save their records. This generation's about that O, and Terence Crawford doesn't want to lose his O, even though Keith Thurman has already lost his O. Another defeat on his record could definitely sideline him, but I don't think he'll be around much longer after the Errol Spence Jr. fight. I definitely think Errol Spence Jr. will be his retirement fight. And I wouldn't be surprised if Terence Crawford actually decided to retire after the Avanesyan fight just to avoid some more stiff competition. It's going to be interesting to see what his ultimate decision is, and will he try to defend his title versus Errol Spence Jr. or some younger competition in 2023. It's your boy Cardinal Red. Hit that like button for me. Share. Subscribe. Holler at me on all social media platforms. Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. More than likely to get a response on the tube. So holler at me over there. And Twitter. And we are man.
Everybody wanna hop like me. So speaks. Everybody wanna hop like me. So speaks. But I bet you can't hop like me. Gotta hop like me. You ain't hot like me. It's Louis Keys and the Herman, pulling up to the spot in the her van, looking for a bad chick that ain't scared to dance. Get her so wet that she need a new pair of pants. She soggy, only player in the club sipping on sake. Eyes looking like he missed the Miyagi, blowing on bomb trees, flowing on sauce beats. How you gonna stop me? It's not an option. I'ma get it poppin'. You can take her shopping, she still let me knocked in. She know I'm just trying to win. She ain't trying to bend, I ain't trying to spin. When she tell the player no, I ain't trying again. I'ma just move on and I'm trying to friend. It's your boy Louis Keys, I'm a shit starter. Young player with a hop like Vince Carter.